Welcome to The Explainer. I am so glad you're here today because we are diving into a really massive, absolutely fascinating topic. We are going on a journey through the geopolitics of South Asia, looking at how the entire region is defined by this really complex push and pull. On one hand, you have these rigid, heavily militarized borders drawn decades ago, and on the other, you have the fluid, shared ecology of the region's mighty rivers. It's a story of intense tension, for sure, but also of completely unavoidable interdependence.
To get us started, think about this central question. How do lines drawn way back in 1947 define the nuclear and ecological future of South Asia? I mean, the stakes here literally couldn't be higher. We're talking about intertwined issues of contested land, massive military power, and an environment that simply refuses to recognize political boundaries. And the consequences of all this? They ripple out to affect global climate stability and international security as a whole. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with the legacy of drawn borders, move into the Kashmir conflict, discuss the resulting nuclear arms race, look at transboundary water tensions, and finally, explore a relational path forward.
Let's jump right into Part 1, the legacy of drawn borders, lines in the sand.
To truly understand the present, we have to look at the historical roots. In the immediate aftermath of the 1947 partition, British rule established physical boundaries, specifically the Radcliffe, McMahon, and Durand lines. But you have to remember, these weren't just abstract lines on a map. They literally divided the subcontinent. They grouped together diverse populations and split natural geographies right down the middle. This laid the direct groundwork for the incredibly complex, long-standing territorial conflicts between the newly formed states that we still see today.
Which brings us to Part 2, the Kashmir conflict, the nuclear flashpoint.
We're moving now to what is arguably the most critical consequence of those 1947 borders, the ongoing dispute over the region of Kashmir between India and Pakistan. It's got a long, really turbulent history. It all ignited in 1947 when the Maharaja of Kashmir signed the Instrument of Accession in favor of India. Since then, well, the region has seen an overt war in 1965, high-altitude clashes during the 1999 Kargil conflict, and a massive political shift recently in 2019 when India revoked Article 370, which stripped Jammu and Kashmir of its special constitutional status. It's basically been a continuous 7-decade stalemate.
This directly feeds into Part 3, the nuclear arms race and escalating stakes. So what began as localized border disputes over places like Kashmir quickly spiraled into a classic security dilemma. Action led to reaction, pushing the whole region into a high-stakes nuclear arms race. And it's fascinating because these two nations approach their nuclear capabilities fundamentally differently. India's doctrine rests on a no-first-use policy and maintaining what they call a credible minimum deterrent, essentially a retaliation-only posture. On the flip side, Pakistan relies on full-spectrum deterrence. They keep their threshold for nuclear use intentionally flexible, mainly to offset India's conventional military advantages.
And the sheer scale of development here is pretty staggering. Pakistan is rapidly evolving its ballistic and cruise missile arsenal right now, possessing an estimated 150 to 160 nuclear warheads. Because their doctrine relies on offsetting those conventional military disadvantages we just talked about, their arsenal leans heavily towards short to medium-range ballistic missiles, like the Shaheen series, alongside mobile cruise missiles like the Babur.
Over on the other side, we have India's rapidly expanding forces. India possesses an estimated 130 to 140 nuclear warheads. Now, while they definitely maintain short-range capabilities like the Prithvi, India has increasingly focused its attention on intermediate and intercontinental systems. For instance, their Agni series represents a clear ambition to cast a much wider deterrent net, which is heavily influenced by their threat perceptions regarding China, in addition to Pakistan.
Let's translate this abstract deterrence into tangible, operational facts. Pakistan's Shaheen-3 medium-range ballistic missile can reach 2,750 kilometers. That covers most of India. India's Agni-5 intercontinental ballistic missile pushes out to a massive 8,000 kilometers. Meanwhile, both nations boast highly sophisticated shorter-range cruise missiles, the Babur and the BrahMos, designed for rapid, tactical deployment. The operational ranges here are just staggering, and they present a potential for nuclear fallout that would have catastrophic consequences for the entire globe.
But remember, these weapons aren't just sitting idle. They cast a very long shadow. In fact, there have been 3 major crises in this nuclear shadow where massive troop mobilizations brought the region to the absolute edge. In 1986 and 87, Indian military exercises near the border, Operation Brass Tacks, sparked major security fears in Pakistan. In 1999, forces clashed directly in the high-altitude cargo conflict, incredibly, just a year after both nations conducted nuclear tests. And then from 2001 to 2002, Operation Parakram saw a 14-month military standoff where ballistic missiles were actually placed in firing positions.
And the cost of this continuous standoff? $69 billion. That was just the combined 2018 defense budget of India and Pakistan. Imagine the economic toll of that. That is billions of dollars diverted away from infrastructure and development in a region where over a third of the poorest people live below the poverty line.
All right, let's pivot to Part 4, Transboundary Water Tensions, Fluid Borders.
We are shifting gears now from the rigid, militarized past into the fluid, ecological present. Because while militaries can guard lines in the sand, rivers cross them entirely unchecked. This quote captures it perfectly. Water diplomacy is a relational practice, where the objective is not only to develop rivers, but to balance social, economic, and ecological aspects. You simply cannot manage a living river ecosystem with a rigid, militarized mindset. These shared rivers force unavoidable interdependence among neighbors who have historically been deeply divided. Historically, treaties have managed this interdependence, but today, they are seriously straining under modern pressures. Take the 1960 Indus Water Treaty between India and Pakistan. Yes, it has survived, but it is fraught with friction over India's upstream storage projects like the Baglihar and Kishanganga dams. Between India and Bangladesh, the Ganges and Teesta rivers suffer from heavy sedimentation, salinity intrusion, and intense arguments over minimum dry season flow guarantees. And between India and Nepal, the Mahakali Treaty has been severely complicated by the Kalapani border dispute over the river's actual headwaters. To understand just how absurd this can get, look at the Susta village dispute. Get this, the Gandak River, which is shared by India and Nepal, naturally changed its course. And when it did, a village that was geographically in Nepal suddenly ended up on the Indian side of the river. It perfectly illustrates how natural, fluid river movements can literally rewrite human political borders, rendering strict territorial lines completely inadequate.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, a relational path forward, shared survival. Because the old methods of dividing resources just aren't working against modern ecological threats, experts are calling for a massive shift in thinking. We have to move away from the old rational approach, treating rivers like a pie to be sliced up based purely on volume. Instead, we need a relational approach. This means protecting water quality, preserving biodiversity, and managing the entire river basin. If these regional river basins fail due to climate change and mismanagement, the ripple effect on global food chains and climate systems is going to be immense.
A really crucial tool for this new relational approach is something called the Wi-Fi nexus. This is a framework integrating water, energy, food, and ecology. Rather than looking at a river just as a source of hydropower or just as a source of irrigation, policymakers have to adopt this composite view to evaluate the complex trade-offs and build socio-ecological resilience. It forces leaders to look beyond singular, narrow conflicts over just water volume.
So, to actually transform regional water diplomacy, experts lay out a clear three-pronged approach. First, reinforce practical adaptation strategies like early flood warning systems. Second, revisit negotiation frameworks by bringing scientists directly to the table. And finally, step 3, revitalize the borderlands themselves.
Let's zoom in on that last step for a second, because it's incredibly vital and honestly offers a lot of hope. Revitalizing the borderlands means actually empowering the local communities who live day-to-day with these transboundary rivers. It involves building awareness, engaging deeply with local government institutions, and fostering cooperation through civil society groups. Notably, the evidence suggests that creating women's collectives to, quote-unquote, feminize water diplomacy is an absolutely highly effective way to build lasting, grassroots water communities.
Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought to ponder. Will ecological necessity and shared rivers ultimately override South Asia's historical border animosities? When the glaciers melt and the rivers shift, well, nature doesn't check a passport. Perhaps the inescapable reality of shared ecology will force the peace and regional cooperation that politics alone just could not achieve. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.